Hi, guys, and welcome to the podcast. This is going to be the second episode of the Improving Always podcast. Last week, we talked about individual technical training. Obviously, we went off on a couple different tangents. Today, we're going to talk about resistance training, specifically for soccer football players. What you should be doing, how you should be doing it, how you should approach this kind of training, and probably most importantly, why you should be doing it. Because I know there's a lot of confusion over whether resistance training will make you a better athlete or not. Obviously, all of us, I'm sure, will disagree at times on this podcast. But in general, all of us are in favor of resistance training and think it can be very, very beneficial. Let's hop right in. So I'll start us off just by saying that basically for me there are so many benefits to resistance training, but you can probably separate them into at least three main categories, and those three main categories are, and in my opinion, this is in order of importance. Number one, reduced injury rates from resistance training. 2, performance benefits, and 3, mental benefits. So most of the benefits we'll talk about will fall into those 3 categories. There's a chance that some fall outside of that. But yeah, those are the 3 main areas. So I think let's start just by talking a little bit about, the reduction in injury rates and why that is important.
Yes. Probably the main reason athletes do resistance training, period, would be the injury reduction rates. With the scientific literature, we've seen that resistance training has decreased injuries in pretty much all populations, and that includes athletes all the way to the elderly. And the main reason to this is a lot of people, one of the common criticisms of resistance training, especially in the bodybuilding category, is that it's all about muscles. It's all about show muscles like your biceps and all this stuff. However, resistance training will cause physiological adaptations to not only your muscles, but your connective tissues and your bones, and it will increase bone mineral density. And bone mineral density increasing will make it harder for you to break a bone. And when we're playing sports, for example, I mean, you're applying hundreds of pounds of force into your legs into the ground at times. And if your bones are more dense, they're less likely to break. Not to mention, there's tons of research showing that resistance training can decrease all-cause mortality rates and much, much more.
Yeah. So I know there's this idea that resistance training will cause you to get injured. But when you actually look at injury rates in different sports, so obviously bodybuilding isn't always considered a sport. So I've struggled to find information on that, but I would assume that injury rates in bodybuilding probably wouldn't be higher than in weightlifting or powerlifting. If I had to guess, I'd say they'd be lower. I could be wrong on that. But still, weightlifting and powerlifting are 2 of the safest sports that you can do.
Yes, sir.
Once you get on the field, you introduce so many different factors, other players, tackling you, you're running around on a field. You're not, just standing in place. Obviously, weightlifting and powerlifting, I respect athletes who, are involved in those sports. And I'm not saying it's easy, but it is safer than playing a field sport as far as injury rates go. And even though I've heard this argument come up sometimes, but you still could get injured. Yes, you could get injured. You could get injured walking down your steps. You could get injured, on like riding a bike. Like, are you just never going to do anything in life because there's a non-zero chance you could get injured? And the benefits of resistance training outweigh those injury risks. So if you resistance train, you will, even though you're like doing some extra work and there's, a tiny chance that you could pick up an injury, there's balance that with the reduced injury rates that you have from doing resistance training when you're on the field. So if you're in the gym or doing resistance training at home, there is not a single study showing that will increase your injury rate or injury risk when you go to play soccer. And every single study I have seen has shown a marked reduction in injury rates, even from just a small amount of resistance training. And, like Noblet said, that's, increased bone mineral density, strength of your, ligaments and tendons, ability to handle, more stress on your body. All of these things go into it. But you don't even need to understand exactly, the mechanics of how it works. If you just see that in every study that soccer players have put through a resistance training program, they get injured less. That's enough. That's enough for me.
I mean, isn't soccer's like the most dangerous sport?
It's
like
up
by
there.
far to get a serious injury, like percentage wise, I'm pretty sure I read. So there are no risks, basically. You might as well lift.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing I want to bring up just, at the beginning of the podcast, I know whenever I talk about this stuff, people always ask, what's resistance training? Why are you saying resistance training? And the main thing for me is that, I like going to the gym. I have a home gym. I have a squat racks and barbells and plates and some dumbbells and stuff. You don't need that to strength train. It's great. And I think it helps, and it doesn't make things less safe. But you don't need that. You can do resistance training, which is why I don't call it weight training, at home with practically no equipment. You can also use things like, bands for resistance training.
All quarantine, baby.
Yeah. I mean, and I know that a lot of people who, follow us or, listen to this podcast are maybe not going to have access to a gym, especially at this time where, this still, I know there are still people who are in quarantine, still people who are in lockdowns. So don't use, I can't go to the gym as an excuse. It's not an excuse. I have gone through, long periods of time where I didn't touch a weight, but I still managed to get stronger. I was still resistance training. There are no excuses. You can do this stuff at home. You need to be a little bit more creative, but you can definitely do it. Anything else to add on the, reduced injury rates side of things?
I mean, the only thing I'd have to add about the reduced injury rates is a very simple thought. For example, I can squat 500 pounds. What would happen if the average person put 500 pounds on their back? What do you think would happen to them?
They break in half.
Yeah, they'd get stapled to the floor. But I stand back up.
They do it easily.
So you and me, Dimitri. But I mean, it's really that simple. I mean, the idea that this makes you more likely to get injured outside of it when you can withstand these types of forces is it's kind of nonsensical, in my opinion. If you can withstand those types of forces when weightlifting, you're going to withstand those types of forces, whether it's on a soccer field or in a car crash even. And that's the way it works. I do want to touch one thing on the equipment issue. I think there is a valid argument of what's optimal and what could be effective. I think for very obvious reasons, there's a reason most professional clubs, when they have their players doing strength and conditioning, have a full gym, have access to barbells, dumbbells, machines, all the crazy machines and bands and everything. And a lot of us don't have access to that. Christo and I are lucky. I have a dungeon with a squat rack, but I also have limited equipment. Like, I don't have a place where I can even do, for example, bench press if I wanted. I can't do bench press at home, which is perfectly fine because I hate bench press. But there are limitations. I would say with bodyweight exercises, I mean, for soccer players in particular, we're mostly concerned with our lower body strength. And while I definitely think you can make lower body strength and power gains.
What you're talking about over there.
And make lower, you don't want to see my bicep in comparison, but to make lower body strength and gains, you're going to have to be either very creative with things like pistol squats or high step ups, but you're not going to be able to replicate squatting hundreds of pounds or even doing Romanian deadlifts with hundreds of pounds or anything like that. Eventually, there is a point of diminishing returns with bodyweight training, in my opinion. However, if that's your start, go for it.
Yeah, I think like obviously, you know, we talked about this last week. Like there are probably optimal things to do, but the most important thing is to do something. Obviously, you know, if you're at the point where you can't progress much more with just bodyweight training, you've done all right. And then, you know, you can figure things out from there. But you've already come further than most players will ever come. So, you know, just super important. And just one thing more before we, you know, leave that. Oh, yeah, go ahead, D.
But no, just one thing I want to note. A lot of people with like body weight training, sometimes it's tough to progress, you know, because you can do like, say you want to do like upper body, you're doing push-ups and stuff. And you get to the point where you're doing normal push-ups very well, you're like cranking out 50, like 70, 100, whatever, and then you switch to a different type of pull-up and your push-up, and you're calling it a progression. It's so different because all these push-ups, you're actually working like different muscles most of the time, you know, if you go from normal to diamond, or you do all these things. So it's not necessarily like a linear progression if you're switching styles. So you got to be careful with that too.
Yeah. And, you know, it takes a lot of creativity to like eventually, you know, you're going to run out of things you can do. But again, like once you've gotten to that point, first off, well done. Then we can figure out what to do next, whether that's getting access to a gym or finding a way to get some equipment in at home. But if you've gotten to that point, well done. One more thing I want to say before we move on a little bit from injury rates. I'm sure we'll come back to it throughout the podcast, but I see this idea sometimes that you can eliminate your injury risk. This is just not true. Anyone telling you that you, if you follow a certain program or do what they tell you to do, you will not get injured is lying to you.
Or a wizard.
Yeah. Or they're a wizard. Yeah. Injuries happen. And this is both contact injuries and non-contact injuries. When you're running on a soccer field, you know, there are other players there. Like I talked about before, there are just so many variables going on in these situations that you can't control them all. So injuries happen. I mean, I tore my Achilles with no players within, you know, 10 feet of me. It was just a bad step. And you know, things happen, and other athletes have suffered. I know other athletes have suffered, you know, similar injuries. It's not just contact injuries that, you know, that happen. Injuries happen. The best you can do is reduce your risk of getting injured. And that's all you can do. And we'll do another episode at some point talking about injuries specifically, you know, how to reduce your risk, but then also what to do when you are injured, because every athlete who's played at a good level will go through a period of time where they cannot play.
We should play injury bingo.
Especially if you're pushing it hard. I've never seen athletes that actually push the boundaries of their actual like abilities that never pick up some sort of injury.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of it, unfortunately.
Yep, definitely.
One thing I'd like to add, before we move on, is this is my opinion. I'm not sure if you guys can relate to this, but I would say that with body weight training, if you can't handle your body weight, whether that's like you can't do 5 proper squats with your body weight, or like 5 to 10 push-ups with your body weight, or like 2 pull-ups with your body weight, I would recommend to start mastering those movements, like be able to do 20 push-ups, maybe like 10 pull-ups, and maybe 10 squats before actually doing it with a bar on your back with weights, or like doing a bench press with weights.
Yeah. I mean, like if you can't squat 5 times your body weight, you have no business putting a bar on your back. And you like often when I start with athletes, it's a lot of body weight stuff, and then we add weights in. I remember Noblet posted a video about why push-ups are better than bench press. So I'm sure he'd agree with you on
to be fair, those are weighted
well.
push-ups.
Yeah, true. But I mean, you have to be able to do push-ups without weight to then put weight on, right?
I mean, I think there's actually, to SK points, a very, very obvious statement here. To be fair, this would actually apply to most strength sports too, because they have weight class categories. However, in soccer, what are we doing with our muscles and our tendons? We're pressing our body weight against the ground and moving our body weight against the ground. And if you can't squat your body weight 5 times, you're not going to run very fast and you're not going to jump very high. So your strength and power output as an athlete has to be relative to your body weight. So like, if you're 300 pounds and you can squat 315 for like a single, you're not going to do much on a soccer field because you're not going to run very fast. And I think this actually sets us up into the athletic side of things. If you don't mind me getting started.
No, go ahead. It's a good segue.
So basically, from a performance aspect, what we're trying to see for the most part in soccer players is their ability to produce force into the ground, to run faster, jump higher, and change directions quicker. And really, this is where I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding on it, is what is running faster, what is jumping higher. It's your ability to apply that force quickly into the ground and push off and move your body against gravity. And that's what exercises like squats, deadlifts, step ups, and lunges will train, is your ability to apply force into the ground. And that will make you run faster and jump higher.
Yeah. The biggest benefits I've seen from resistance training for just athletes in general, and then obviously soccer players specifically. But I think it's a mistake to only look at evidence tied to soccer players, because if you're looking for things that you need to do in a sport like basketball or rugby or something,
vertical jump increase.
Yeah, exactly. Like those things matter in football, right? So acceleration, jump, vertical jump, broad jumps, sprint speed over like 10, 20 meters. All of these things are increased through resistance training. And these are the things you need. Also, very, very important to point out. So soccer is an endurance sport. I would qualify it as an endurance sport. It's an hour and a half long, or depending what level you play at. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of people watching this haven't progressed to 90 minutes yet, but soccer games are long. You need to have endurance to play. It's not enough to sprint 10 or 20 meters one time. But there is absolutely no evidence that resistance training will decrease your endurance. There literally none. Now there is evidence that doing endurance training will reduce how strong you are at a certain point. So if you're going to be an elite level soccer player, you are not also going to be probably an elite, although Noblet will probably disagree with me on this. You're probably not going to be as strong as you could be if all you did was resistance training and you didn't play soccer at all. Now the level of that is probably not huge. But this idea that, resistance training will make you unfit is just not true. It's not going to make you like fat either, unless you're eating way too much. Like gaining weight it's about your diet. It's not about the kind of training that you're doing. Really, it's more about how many calories you're consuming, and then are you how active you are. So yeah, you get all these benefits, and then I've even seen evidence that resistance training will help you. It will help you with endurance. Will make you more fit. But that evidence is a little bit conflicted. I've also seen evidence that it has no impact on your endurance. So we're not resistance training to be able to run, longer distances. Really, that's not the main benefit, but it's not going to hurt your endurance.
And yes, I'd like to touch on the point about the doing intense physical activity outside of resistance training and resistance training for maximal strength, because I actually have experience competing in powerlifting, and Christo's 100% right. If I'm training for soccer seriously, I could not run a powerlifting program to peak for a powerlifting meet properly and actually be able to get to my maximal strength. If I was going to do that, like I would actually have to kind of put soccer on maintenance and just kind of like chill for a little while on soccer so I don't fatigue myself playing. And here's the thing, for most of us, we're not also playing that many other sports. So that's not really what we're going to want to do. So we will put our weight training as supplementary to our soccer opposed to as our primary goal. And to be completely honest, you don't need maximal strength to be a soccer player. I mean, if you wanted maximal strength, you would go into a strength sport like powerlifting, weightlifting, or strongman. And nothing wrong with those sports.
One of those.
And that's part of it.
Yeah,
and I forgot what I was going to say.
Sorry, I had to sneak that in there somewhere.
If I can add on to Christo's point about, I think he said endurance training, like would you say weightlifting might not, like weightlifting cannot like increase your endurance, but it also doesn't affect it. I think that's what you said.
I mean, I've actually seen some evidence. Actually, I'll bring this up now. I'm actually, we're hopefully going to publish an article that I wrote for my master's dissertation, which is on resistance training in girl soccer players. So under 18 female soccer players. And I actually found a study that showed that resistance training increased your endurance. And then I also found a handful of studies that said it had no impact. So if I had to guess between the two, I'd say it probably has little to no impact, but there is no evidence that it will hurt your endurance. So we're not resistance training to get more fit. We're resistance training for other benefits, but it's not going to hurt your fitness. If it did, obviously, that would be, an issue, but it's not going to.
Now I can actually add into that because it used to be very taboo among endurance runners to do resistance training, but now you're seeing most of the top endurance runners doing resistance training. And also, contrary to popular belief, they're not doing super high reps and sets. They're doing closer to what we're doing, but usually with lighter weights. Yeah, because they're not as strong as soccer players, obviously. Yeah, but the main thing is endurance runners will do this because it will, one, decrease their injury rates, because tons of pounding, especially if they're running on concrete, is just not great for the body in the long run for running 20 miles or something like that. And the other reason is that every single step they take, if they're applying slightly more force with their comfortable stride, they'll actually run the endurance race faster. One point I would like to make, and I think this is something that we should mention on, is soccer does definitely have an endurance aspect. However, it's actually probably more of an anaerobic sport than it is an aerobic sport. There are 3 energy systems that are used in athletics, and you never use only one of them at once. You're always using all 3 of them. And that's the phosphogenic, glycolytic, and oxidative. And oxidative is your pure cardiovascular, like going for a jog. Glycolytic is your in-between intense and that. And phosphogenic is your full-out sprinting or full-out lifting, like a 1-rep back weight. And at least according to the NSCA, the National Strength and Conditioning Association, soccer is primarily a phosphogenic sport. And that's because in soccer, at least most of my running is short, quick sprints. Like I short, quick sprint, and then maybe I very slowly jog or walk for a little while. And that's the entire game.
Yeah. Yeah. How often do you run 100 meters? It's doesn't happen that often. Like every once in a while, a right back will run all the way from their box to the other box, or like a midfielder or something. But most of your work in soccer is over 10 meters, maybe 20, but a lot of it's even shorter than that, 5 quick steps to get in position. Let's go back to SK before we derail the conversation.
So what I was trying to say is maybe not endurance in the VO2 max kind of way, but endurance in your legs, like how much you can actually run without getting fatigued in your legs. And I'm pretty sure that weightlifting, if you put in more reps, higher amount of reps, can actually increase the amount of running you can do with your legs.
Yeah, well, think like we said that running or resistance training will make you quicker over 10 meters. So if it makes you quicker over 10 meters, you could probably also run 10 meters at the same speed you could before, but then you could do it again. And then you could and then you could do it again. And then you could do it again. So, just like, or, you could run it faster. And then the next time you run it, you could probably run it, faster than you could have if you weren't resistance training. So, that resistance training, just so many benefits to performance, for sure. Anything else on, obviously we'll touch on it again as we go, but
I guess I could just add on to the point SK was making. Let's say we were running something at like 25% of our energy expenditure. If you then did resistance training for like 6 months, that 25% would probably be a little faster just because your muscles would naturally apply more force into the ground. So that would improve your endurance performance on the pitch.
Yeah, for sure. And then because of who I am and what I talk about, we also have to bring up the mental benefits of resistance training, because there are mental benefits.
You look good, you feel good, you play good.
Yeah. I mean,
that's
honestly,
the motto right there.
It is true. Like improved confidence through resistance training is a pretty well studied thing. It does increase your confidence. And as we all know, when you're confident, you're just a completely different player. I'm not saying that this should be the main reason you resistance train. I did put it third in the list for a reason, because I think the evidence for the other two is just overwhelming. And there are probably other things you could do to improve your confidence, and as much as resistance training. But there is that benefit there, and I think it would be wrong not to bring it up.
And I totally agree with this. For one, resistance training, I like to bring back to the point that it's fun a lot in any sport or athletic activity. It's something fun that you can actually do, and it can actually be a stress reliever. There's plenty of research on resistance training and stress relief. And especially if you're like having a rough patch with your soccer career, if you can go to the gym and enjoy it, and it seems like a break from your soccer career, even if you are training for soccer, it can have positive psychological benefits. I mean, if you're struggling on the pitch, but your squat feels really good when you're in the gym, or you're doing well on any exercise outside of it, it will carry over to confidence on the pitch. And not to mention, there's another aspect to it, and this is probably one of the points that I'll bring up a lot, is if you're strong, like you're strong, you're going to be much, much more confident going into tackles against other people and other physical confrontations, because especially when you're at the lower levels. Now, when we get into the higher levels, like college and professional, most of the guys lift weights. So you'll still be confident, but you're going to be going up against someone harder. But at the amateur levels, most players do not lift weights. So you're probably going to be stronger than them. So you might just crush them in every 50-50 challenge, which that's always going to help your cycle.
I will push back a little bit. Most college soccer players most professional soccer players are not doing any kind of so obviously professional at the highest level, there's a gym. I would probably still disagree with a lot of the things that athletes and trainers put themselves through, because they overcomplicate a lot of stuff for no reason. But even 90+% of athletes in high school don't resistance train, and that number doesn't drop that much when you go to college. So you might have like a mandatory lift 1 or 2 times a week or something. A lot of this stuff is not hugely beneficial. And soccer is one of the sports where resistance training is the lowest rates of resistance training.
Taboo.
Yeah, for sure. So I do know, obviously in the States, a lot of, if you're at a D1 college, you're probably going to do at least some resistance training. Looking at professional leagues though, so lower divisions in England or, anywhere else in Europe, most players won't resistance train at all. And if they do, it'll probably be some sort of circuit training with just with body weight.
Wait,
Yeah,
I'm going to jump on that. But first, I'm going to go back for 1 second and say one of the other really rewarding things about resistance training is it's so easy to see your progression, which is really nice. So you can be having a hard spell playing soccer, and then you can be resistance training for like a month or something, and you could look back at the weight you started with, and it's so easy to see how much stronger you've gotten. You're able to say, oh, I put 20 pounds on my squat in a month. Awesome. So that's another really nice thing mentally about rewarding resistance training.
Yeah.
And then going back onto what Christo was saying, I know over here, even in Spain, 4th and 3rd division, which is a very high level, we didn't do any resistance training. All the gym work that we did was injury prevention, but it was like what an old person would do in rehab. You know what I mean? We weren't doing weighted squats and heavy lifts like that. And it was also a lot of circuit training on the field. So yeah, definitely not a lot of heavy weights.
Yeah, better than nothing. But a lot of not very optimal at all. That's what I would say. Go ahead.
Just to ask you guys a question, if no one has anything to say about this topic, how would you plan like a full session for a soccer player, would you say?
I'd contact my brother, Coach Christo, and I'd say, Coach Christo, give me a resistance training.
Like, what's the template?
You're not gonna pick Noblet over me.
Oh, I have yours now. Yours is going well. I'll have to ask Noblet for his next, and then I can do a little YouTube TikTok comparison.
Really, really quick before we get to that, I just want to bring this up because it was something that came up when I was doing research for my my master's dissertation. So performance benefits are pretty equivalent between men and women, girls and boys. Injury reduction rates actually higher for women that resistance train than for men, not in every study, but in several different studies. And mental benefits also higher for women than they are for men. Now, so if you are a girl, resistance training is actually even more important for you. So I have a theory as to why this is. And if I had to guess, I would say it's probably because men have more muscle mass naturally and women have less. So I know we talked last week about how like the first bit of training you do, that's what you get the most benefits. Because if you go from training not at all to training a little bit, that's a bigger difference than going from training a little bit to a medium amount and so on. Not to say that you shouldn't be doing more, but going from having very little muscle mass to, a decent amount will probably help you more than going from having a decent amount to having a lot. So women that resistance train, can gain muscle mass, and then that helps them. I haven't seen a lot of evidence that it makes the performance benefits are bigger than they are for men, but for injury reduction, it's actually more important. And then a lot of women struggle with confidence issues. Not to say men don't, but from what I saw when I was doing research for this particular paper that I was writing, young women, so under 18, struggled more with confidence than men, or than boys under the age of 18. And the mental benefits from doing some sort of resistance training were bigger for women. So just something to mention. I know a lot of people think that girls shouldn't resistance train, and that is just absolute nonsense.
And I'd like to add to that, because I think there's a very common misconception with resistance training, especially with women. One of the main reasons that people don't like women resistance training is they see these steroided up women's bodybuilders that are huge and look somewhat masculinized, but they think that's from doing dumbbell curls and not from taking anabolic steroids. And the reality is it's actually extremely difficult to gain any significant amount of muscle mass. And this is times 10 for a woman. And what a lot of people think is she'll do one dumbbell curl and she'll be Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that's just not how it works.
All those memes of like a woman touches a barbell once, and then it's like the
and then she's Ronnie Coleman.
Yeah.
And like the fact of the matter is, and like, let's be honest, a lot of personal confidence does come down to your actual appearance to a lot of people. And what you actually see with a lot of women when they start lifting weights is they actually get the toned feminine physique that they want. They just basically add the curves that they want instead of huge muscles. They don't get huge biceps or huge back or any of these things. They actually just end up looking more aesthetic, and that's what they wanted anyways.
Yep.
That's why they avoided lifting weights.
Yeah. So yeah, we can, I think it's, so I do have some, resistance training plans, and I do have, ideas for different levels of athletes. Probably, there's a couple things, to kind of touch on, as we get into that. So like, sets, reps, intensity, rest times, all of this stuff is going to be really, really important. So we can kind of start going through that stuff. So we'll start with one of the things that I think is I see a lot of players struggle with is the intensity that you should be training at. You should not be taking many or any of your sets to failure. So you have talked about RPE, rate of perceived exertion, last week. I actually prefer using a different scale, reps in reserve, IRI, just because I think it's more intuitive. And like no matter how plainly you explain RPE, people still get confused. And with IRI, I found people get less confused.
You want to hear something funny about that real quick?
Go ahead.
Mike Teixeira, who is one of the best powerlifting coaches in the world, modified the RPE scale to basically be reps in reserve.
Yeah.
So a RPE 10 is a full 1 rep max. RPE 9 is you could do 1 more rep. RPE 8 is you could do 2 more reps. So it is reps in reserve.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, but
basically the same was just kind of coming at it from like the opposite way.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny.
Yeah, but no, yeah, I mean, the traditional RPE scale is full max effort, almost full max effort, hard, not very hard. And yeah, that's more subjective, to where the reps in reserve version of it is much more easy to.
Yeah. And I mean, because I use RPE for so long, like when I do my own training, I write down the RPE, not the IRI, but RIR. I've been saying this wrong the whole time. The
Hey, it's not as fun as
RIR.
RPE. RPE is just better. Rolls off the
All right,
tongue.
but for clients, I found that reps in reserve makes more or is less confusing to them when I explain it. So basically, what I would say is, like, say you're doing a set of squats, and you do a set of 5, because why not? And you could have done 2 more reps with perfect form or close to perfect form. Obviously, no one's form is ever going to be completely perfect. But, close to perfect form, hitting the depth that you want. And you could have done 2 more reps. That means that you had 2 reps in reserve. So 2 RIR, or it was an RPE of 8. So yeah, that means you could have done 2 more reps. Now, intensity is really, really important, because if you train to failure, where you could not do another perfect rep, or you could not do another rep at all, or you even, fail on a rep, the recovery cost of that is very large, much larger than if you stopped a rep before. And there's not really any extra benefit you're getting, not any extra benefit from what I've seen at all in terms of, gaining muscle, gaining strength, any of that. I haven't seen evidence that training, to failure makes you stronger or bigger or has more injury prevention benefits. If anything, it's detrimental, because it costs, it taxes your recovery much more, so that you can't train as much, you can't train as hard, et cetera.
And I'd like to add on to something about this, because one of the big issues with sport-specific training for a sport like soccer, but this would also apply to most field sports or basketball as well. Soccer is a speed-specific sport, so especially if our bigger compound lifts like squats, any form of deadlift, or step-up lunges or something like that, we want to actually maintain a relatively fast bar speed. We don't want to be doing slow and grindy reps, because we're not looking for that maximal force output. We're looking for maximal power output. And I'm going to have to explain the difference between force and power real quick. And the easiest way to explain this is force is literally just how much force I can apply to the ground. So if your 1 rep max is 500 pounds, that's your maximal force. But a 1 rep max is going to be slow. You're not going to do that very quickly. Power is ability to apply force rapidly. So somebody who can jump 30 inches into the air is applying a significant amount of power through the ground. So one way I would use resistance training to train power is I would use something that is closer to an RP or reps in reserve 7 or 8, to where we're stopping before the reps get slow, and we're doing all our sets to where they're moving the weight fast, but it still needs to be a heavy weight. I would say it needs to be at least 75% of your 1 rep max to do this. But instead of taking this to close to your point of failure or even form failure, you're stopping at bar speed. When your bar speed starts to decrease, you stop there. That way you're training in the bar speed that you need to produce power. Now, one area I might have a minor disagreement with Christo here is the area on hypertrophy. Now, for soccer players, hypertrophy is secondary. Hypertrophy is more of a added benefit that might help in some ways. But for pure hypertrophy training, you actually do want to get close to failure. But the difference being is that if you're training for purely hypertrophy, you're probably going to be using lighter weights and higher repetitions anyways. And also, a lot of people who train for pure hypertrophy are probably going to be doing more isolation movements anyways than big lifts. Like, you're not going to take a squat to failure very often, because that's dangerous. So you'll do a leg press or a hack squat instead, things like that.
Yeah. When you say close to failure, I probably agree with you. I think a lot of people who train for hypertrophy like training to failure on smaller exercises. So again, if you enjoy it, might help you just because you're enjoying it and do it more.
That pain.
Yeah. But I think like if you're being very, very strict with what's actually optimal, you would still train to failure very rarely, but you might go to RPE 9, a bunch on smaller exercises, right?
Yeah, like 2 to 3 reps from failure would probably be optimal most of the time. For hypertrophy, what you would want to avoid is 5-6 reps away from failure.
Yeah, for sure. Because, but at the same time, I think if you're training for hypertrophy, if you're training to failure all the time, you're probably not going to be able to train as much, do as many sets, as many reps. So like say you're doing, bicep curls and you're going to do five sets. You do the first set and you take it to failure. That probably means that the next sets you do, you'll be doing less reps than if you just did, stayed one rep away. If you're going to train to failure, probably the last set. Is that really needed? Probably not. But if it's something that someone enjoys and they're training for hypertrophy, fair play. But again, the compound movements are going to look fairly similar. Not all the time. But I think, getting strong makes your muscles bigger, as well. So, if you get strong, you will have, big muscles. That's part of it, right?
Actually, muscle mass is the best predictor of outright strength anyway. So while obviously neural adaptations and technique improvements even do matter, what they found is even in elite level powerlifters is that having bigger muscle mass is the best predictor for all 3 of the big lifts, which was actually like a big surprise to a lot of the powerlifting elitists who think that they're mastering their technique and they're peaking properly. No, just some big jack guy is going to come in there and probably lift the most. And I mean, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I do want to make a point because SK asked, how would we design a program for soccer players? And there's a very common thing, especially on TikTok, of don't train like a bodybuilder, train like an athlete. And I think we should address what that actually means, because I think a lot of people have misconceptions of what that actually means. And I'll like to hear all of your opinions on it. But what it means to me is basically this. For soccer players, we probably don't want to do body part splits. We probably don't want to train arm day on Monday, chest on Wednesday, legs on Friday, back on Thursday, or something like that. For soccer players, for the most part, what I would do is I'd do 1 to 3 full body sessions. We do 3 main lifts, usually some sort of lower body pushing exercise, some sort of upper body pushing exercise, and then lower body pulling and upper body pulling exercises. Bodybuilders would train focusing on body parts, where soccer players would focus on movements. And the other aspect being soccer players will focus more on big compound movements and will occasionally use smaller or even isolation movements as supplementary, where a lot of bodybuilders will do almost the opposite. The isolation and focus on an individual body part will be the priority, and the big movements will be supplementary for their focusing on just isolating one head of the bicep or something like that.
Yeah. So I approach things a little bit differently. And it's not necessarily because I disagree with anything that Noblet just said. I think we're aligned on most things. Now, this is what I have found to be the best kind of bang for the buck program. And it's because most athletes that I work with don't have time or don't want to be in the gym or do resistance training at home more than twice a week. And I think twice a week is enough. I strongly encourage them to do twice a week, not once a week, because I think you get a decent amount of benefits from that second session. But I think if I was to tell them should be training 3 times a week, I would lose more people, completely than, I need that buy-in from players basically. So I start them with 2 times a week. And at the very beginning, now, obviously this changes as I work with an athlete more often. So D will know Dimitri does upper body stuff, not just lower body stuff. The first session that I do with most players, I don't do any upper body training at all. And that's actually true for like first couple weeks, maybe even months, depending on what I can get the player to do. A lot of the time we stick with lower body for a decent amount of time. So my program usually looks something like this. I'll start. So there's 2 days. First day, we'll do a squat variation. And then we'll do a single leg hip hinge variation. So squat variation will obviously, depending, it could be single leg, but it doesn't have to be. Basically, this will be any squat variation. I'll usually go off what the player wants to do. Obviously, we'll keep this exercise consistent, or we'll change it until we find something that they want to stick with and progress with. But it could be something just like a traditional barbell squat, front squat. Something. It could even be a leg press if that's all I can get them to do. It's much better than nothing. And then we will do a single leg hip hinge variation, and then we will do 1, 2, or probably 1 or 2 smaller exercises that I have seen evidence that they either reduce injury risk or improve performance in soccer players. So my favorites for this are single leg calf raises, Nordic hamstring curls, or Nordics, or glute ham raises, something like that. Some kind of isolation E hamstring exercise, and Copenhagen's, which are you can Google that and find out what they are. I don't know exactly how to explain it. But yeah, those 3 exercises, usually, sometimes some other things as well, but those are my 3 go-tos. And then on day 2, we'll do the same thing, but we'll start with a hip hinge. We'll do whatever they want to do. Then we'll do a single leg squat variation, and then we'll add in some smaller stuff. And obviously, as we go, we can add in more days, or we can add in upper body exercises. This isn't exactly what I do right now because I want to train more, and there are benefits to upper body training. But from what I've seen, this is what works the best when I'm introducing resistance training to a footballer, because it gets them to buy in, and then I can change it as we go, rather than starting with something that will have less buy-in, and then I lose people, before they've developed a habit of resistance training.
One thing I want to ask you, Coach Christo, is especially when you said
you can call me Christo. You can call me Christo.
I love that we go with the Coach Christo.
So when you're starting out with players that maybe haven't done resistance training as much, or don't have a plan yet, I think for me, I would start them out with more reps than usual. So like for strength output, like maximum strength and power, you would usually do like lower reps, somewhere from like 3 to 5 or 6, if that's correct. But for players that are just starting out with resistance training, in my opinion, I think I call this the foundation layer. I would usually have them do higher reps just so they can get that foundation layer down. They can get the movement, the form, everything. They can kind of build a little bit of muscle. So maybe it kind of prevents injuries. So I wanted your thoughts on that.
What would you start them out with? What would the rep scheme be, kind of?
So maybe like, let's say we're doing a squat. Instead of doing like 5 reps or like 6 reps, I would maybe go to the 10 to 12 rep range, just to have a little bit more of a hypertrophy, so they can build that good muscle base. And then after like 2 to 3 weeks, maybe I would move them on to lower reps.
So I think usually I'm not going to be doing sets of 3 with complete beginners. I'll probably do more than that. And I would say, yes, probably when I'm starting out with a player, I'll probably be doing slightly higher reps than I would with a more advanced player. Obviously this is gonna change. It's not like, my more advanced athletes won't ever be doing sets of 10. I think a good rule of thumb for compound movements is, don't you're not going to get massively greater benefits. You're not really going to get any greater benefits from going much, much higher than 10. And sets of 20 on squats, if they're hard, really suck. So if you're not getting more extra benefit from that, why would you do it? So
I'm not going above 5 reps on the squat.
No, high reps on squats are miserable.
But at the same time, if I'm just starting with an athlete, doing, sets of 20 with something like bodyweight squats can be good because, but before moving on, because it's not going to be particularly hard. It's not particularly miserable yet because it's not particularly hard. And getting a lot of reps in makes you more proficient at something. So if I have them do 3 sets of 5 and that's all we ever do, they're getting 15 reps of squats in every time we do a session. If they're doing 3 sets of 10, they're doing 30 reps, they're doing more reps, they'll learn the movement a little bit more quickly. And, once I've seen that they can do that, then we can move on. We can start pushing the strength a lot. For more advanced athletes, I usually stay within between 4 reps and 10 reps. I'm not saying that I never go lower. I'm not saying that I never go higher. But I usually stay in that range because there's not huge benefits to going lower in reps, and lower in reps means heavier in weight. And that's not always super fun for athletes. And going a lot higher, as I said, sets of 20, sets of 30 on compound stuff, it's not super fun. So why do it unless we're getting huge benefits from it, which I don't think there's good evidence of.
So I might actually have a minor disagreement here. So now there is some nuance to this, of course, but if we're teaching like a compound lift, like the barbell back squat, and I'm making a very specific point, the barbell back squat, not bodyweight squats, not a goblet squat, I'm actually probably never going to have them do more than 5 reps at a time. And the reason is I want them to focus on getting proper technique. And how we're going to do that and how we're going to make sure that they're doing that is we're going to start out with sub-maximal loads and we'll build up. So for example, the first day they train and do barbell back squats, they might be doing a 5 RPE. It might just be extremely easy. And that's fine. It's their first day in the gym doing back squats. I don't want them struggling on their first day in the gym. And if they're doing sets of 10 or 12, even if it is a lighter weight, it's very likely that they'll be getting fatigued. So you'll see more deterioration in form as they progress with the sets. Now, with truly true beginners, we're probably not going to put a barbell on their back. And here's where the nuance comes in. We're either going to start out with body weight squats. We might even do hands over their head squats to make sure that their mobility to get into that position is good enough. And then we'll do goblet squats. And goblet squats are an exercise that I would do for sets of 10 or something like that because it's mechanically easier. And since it's harder to load a goblet squat super heavy anyways, you're more likely to want to do sets of 10 with it as well. But like for the harder lifts, such as barbell back squat, and this would also apply for deadlifts, whether it's barbell or a trap bar deadlift, I'm probably going to stick to the 3 to 5 rep range with novice lifters. And when we get into more advanced lifters, we might consider doing higher reps in some of those lifts. And that's a point that we have to make is I think novice lifters could basically come into the gym and do 3 sets of 5 2 times a week and make gains. However, someone like myself or Christo who have been lifting several years, we're not going to make gains doing 3 sets of 5. We'll be lucky if 3 sets of 5 a week will maintain our gains. And this is where periodization might come into hand. In the off season, you might have a short hypertrophy block even to try to put on a little mass. But that's not something most novice lifters need to worry about right now, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I'll ask you a question then. Do you think that say we took 2 athletes exactly the same, let's say we
2 Dimitris.
2 Dimitris. Well, I mean, you've been training for a while, so I don't know. But like
two 15-year-old Dimitris,
yeah.
2 15-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
Dimitris.
And one of them we do twice a week. We do either my program or your program, whichever, basic resistance training plan. One of them only does 3 sets of 5, and one of them only does 3 sets of 6. Let's take another. They only do 3 sets of 8, and then another, they only do 3 sets of 10. Do you think that over a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, they are going to have very different experiences, either in terms of they're training at the same-ish intensity, all of that? Do you think they're going to have markedly different experiences in terms of, increased performance or injury reduction or something else?
Well, if we're going by like 1 year, for example, and like they're doing 3 sets of 5, 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 10, basically what you're going to see is mostly insignificant differences, especially in the early stages. And then towards the end of it, what you might see is the 3 sets of 5 group will have a better 1 rep max, but the 3 sets of 10 group will probably have the biggest quads. But it will be minor difference. Like it won't be a huge difference. It's just that since the 3 sets of 5 group is probably going to be training closer to their 1 rep max after the end of that year than the 3 sets of 10, they'll be more used to being under a bar under that condition. But for very obvious reasons, volume is important for hypertrophy growth. So the 3 sets of 10 group would probably have ever so slightly more hypertrophy, but I don't think the differences would be significant.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I don't think we disagree hugely. And as I said, what I recommend for players is based a lot on what I have found players are willing to buy into. So if someone loves training sets of 3 or 4 or 7 or something, like, we're going to do a lot of that. And if someone really loves, training sets of 10, if someone really loves training sets of 15 on squats for some ungodly reason, we'll do some of that.
You kick them out of the gym. You throw them out the window.
Yeah, there's actually something wrong with people who like to squat for. I mean, to be fair, that's me too. I did do a set of 315 for 20 this summer or last summer. So.
Yeah.
Kicked off of the podcast. Goodbye.
Yeah. Just a question I have before we move on about, like, you have 3 different athletes to do 3 sets of 5, 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 10. Wouldn't, and I'm just asking this to you guys, wouldn't the guy that does 3 sets of 5 reps have more strength output that gets converted onto the field, or no?
Yes, and this is actually, I should make this point a little more clear. Higher rep sets are actually harder to recover from too. So when we're looking for soccer player performance, we're looking in many ways for how can we get the most stimulus for adaptation without causing significant recovery issues while we're on the pitch. This is actually the other reason why I tend to trend towards lower rep ranges for athletes is, and like I said, the hypertrophy adaptations, while they're good, they are secondary to the power adaptations, power and strength adaptations. And five reps is more than enough to get hypertrophy adaptations. And basically what I would do is, once that's not enough to get more adaptations, I would just add more sets or another day of lifting potentially. But yes, to some degree. Now, I think the truth of the matter is, if we were to do the experiment, as Christo said it, they're only lifting 2 times a week, 3 by 5 versus 3 by 10. you're not going to see too significant differences in any objective metric. You might see minimal differences, but it won't be huge.
Yeah. So like, and going back to what I said, like, if I have those two athletes and one of them is like, I only want to do sets of 4, and the other one is like, I only want to do sets of 10, I'm not going to argue with them, because I'd rather have them be in the gym consistently. That's what matters more. So small differences might build up over years, but at the same time, different things work for different people mentally, but then also physically. So, we have some kind of rules of thumb for like, I mean, I don't recommend athletes go, super high in reps. And I'm also not going to have an athlete doing 10 sets of 1 every time they set foot in the gym. But there's middle ground where like you can adjust it for the athlete, just based on what works for them, and then also what they enjoy. So, you want to keep them in the gym consistently. And if they're in the gym consistently, they're going to be getting benefits, or of course, resistance training at home, they're going to be getting benefits. Who cares if they're getting 99% of the benefits or 100%? Because that 1% doesn't really matter. It's the 99% that matters.
Yes, and a lot of this has to do with some resistance training is almost always going to be better than no resistance training for an athlete. And that really is. I mean, if you're making a program that they actually want to be there to do, that's going to be so much better than the program that they don't want to be there to do. Because for one, especially if you're not physically there forcing them to go through the exercises, if they don't want to be there, they might just not be there. And we'd rather them be there. And this is going to be a common theme in our podcast. A suboptimal program that you're consistent with will produce better results than an optimal program that you're inconsistent with. And that goes for pretty much everything in life.
Yeah, definitely.
The life lessons.
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about, and Noblet talked a little bit about how he structures his training. So he had the four main, lower body push and pull, upper body push and pull. Yes. And then I talked a little bit about, basically, I start with the lower body push and pull, and I do at least one single leg movement for each of those. And then obviously, after that, I'm trying to get people to, buy into resistance training. And then I add in upper body training, because upper body training does matter. Now, the reason that I include lower body movements, I see a lot of people talk about how resistance training needs to be sport specific, soccer specific. This idea is, it's just not true. You're in the gym. Your sport specific training is done on the field with a ball. You're in the gym to, improve generally and physically, by increasing your power and your, and your strength, things like this. And then you can put that on the field, so that you're better in games. But I still do single body movements, because a lot of the movements you do on the field will be on one leg, and strength is specific. So if you train a barbell back squat, you will be strong at a barbell back squat. You will get stronger at a front squat, but not as strong as if you trained front squats. Yes. If you train strength on one leg, you will be stronger on one leg than you will be if you never train strength on one leg, but you still train as much, but you train on both legs. So there's a reason to do single leg movements. Because a lot of the movements you do on the field are on one leg. So I think single lower body training for a sport like soccer, most sports, to be fair, because most sports you're running around on a field, running is, one leg at a time. You're not bunny hopping all over the place. So maybe except Dimitri.
Amazing how I got to the level I am.
training on one leg has its place. It's not the only thing I do, because for certain things, because training on one leg, you have to do both sides. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Yeah. And I don't think saying, okay, you can only do single leg lower body movements. I think that'd be a little bit stupid, but I think that doing some probably has its benefits.
And I would agree with that. And I would like just to add the pros and cons to both of these. So we'll start out with and we'll use the squat versus a split squat as just easy comparisons. The squat will be, for an athlete, it will be your best exercise for overall strength and power output, because you're going to have more balance because you're on two legs and you can load the bar more. I've never seen anyone doing single leg squats with normally even 50% of their 1 rep max squat. And the reason is balance issues in a single leg squat outweigh the total load issues. So for your actual outright strength and power output, the barbell back squat or front squat even are going to be your best lifts. However, there is the reality that a soccer player needs to be able to apply force off of one leg, and not to mention the balance attributes of being on one leg. If you can't do a Bulgarian or a Bulgarian split squat because you're falling over just standing on one foot, how are you supposed to play sports, especially soccer, when you're on one foot for large portions of the game? Because you can't dribble, shoot, or pass a ball with both feet on the ground. One foot has to be in the air doing the passing or dribbling. So even just the balance aspect of it will strengthen muscles that stabilize your leg that's planted on the ground. And yeah, now I have read some research, like the idea of replicating what it looks like to run with one leg may or may not actually translate as directly as a lot of people think. So when you're setting up a Bulgarian split squat, just because the front leg looks similar to what it would in a sprint doesn't necessarily mean it makes you faster. But at the same time, if there's any chance of it having benefit that way, I think it's good, and it's definitely not hurting. And then just the balance and coordination from learning how to apply force to the ground through one leg is just a net positive.
Yep, definitely agree. All right. So yeah. Upper body work is going to be compound movements as well, as I mentioned. Upper body push, upper body pull, vertical, horizontal. Sure, do both if you want to. Don't necessarily have to. But things like, and then so let's actually we'll save that for the end. We'll go through our kind of our favorite exercises for each of these movements. So that'll be a good clip. How about core work? I'm interested to hear what we think about this.
Ooh, this is a good topic. Who
So
wants to go first?
Are you asking about my
all day?
So are you asking about my favorite core exercise?
Cristiano, no, we'll just like core work in general. What are our thoughts? I'm just gonna put this out there. All right. Cristiano Ronaldo said he does 1,000 sit-ups a day. So if you want to be as good as Cristiano Ronaldo, I think that's probably his secret. It's not anything he does on the field. It's just
it's not the other weight training. It's just the sit-ups.
It's just the sit-ups.
That's the only way.
That's the only thing that has made him such a great player.
For those that are not good satire defectors. Real quick. Do you guys know what Poe's law is?
Nope.
As in the Kung Fu Panda.
Poe's law states that certain things that are satirical are now no longer detectable on the internet. So you can't tell if it's satire or not. So we have to make sure that we don't have anybody having a Poe's Law moment here. So we were being satirical. We think him playing soccer on the pitch is the greatest thing for his carryover. Then we think his strength and conditioning stuff comes next. And in my honest opinion, his sit-ups probably do
waste of time,
next to nothing. And SK, did you have anything you wanted to add on core training yourself before I say something?
Oh yeah, sure. I can go over it. So like 3 years ago, I would have said that a 10-minute ab workout every day would probably just be enough for me for my core. But now, since I got into the gym more, I do more things like the Pallof press, like different variations of that. And then I include like a medicine ball and I do like sit-ups with that. And also I just hang on a bar and like raise my legs up. Stuff like that, I think is a good beneficial way to include core in the weight room.
Yeah. I think as far as it goes for me, doing like compound lifts and like strength training 3 times a week, plus doing 2 days in between that, which is more of like a GPP. So like general physical preparedness, where I just do like
Dimitri is a smart boy again.
All the exercise science.
I'm putting that in the, everyone go through the timestamps from the last episode.
Yes.
Yeah, that took me a long time, but it was 100% worth it.
So on those 2 days, I'm going to be doing like a pull up, like a bicep, a tricep, and then one just like ab exercise. And I think between doing that and the strength training, that's all the abs that I really need to incorporate in my training.
Yeah. Okay. I'll you go first and then I'll
okay. So I'm going to be completely honest on my opinion on core training. I think overall it's probably the most overrated strength and conditioning thing that 100%. There is. And the reason is a lot of people will tell you that, oh, you got to train your core, and they'll be telling you to train your core before you're training your legs, your glutes, or your upper body. And for one, in the scientific literature, even the definition of the core is not quite as well understood. I've seen definitions that would include the entire torso as part of your core. And usually when we think of core, we tend to think of your midsection where your stomach and lower back is. But the other thing about this is you can't do big compound lifts without training your core also. I can't squat without training my core. I can't do an standing overhead press without training my core. I can't do a push-up without training my core. So as far as core training goes, I take a minimalist approach. What I tend to do is, and usually I only do this to people who have been lifting for a little while, because with novice lifters, they get enough from just the main lifts. But with people that have been lifting a little while, I like to focus on exercises that hit aspects of your core that are not hit through your main movements very well. And so examples, SK mentioned the Pavlov prep. That's an anti-rotational exercise. Anti-rotational exercises are great because in soccer, you have to resist forces of rotation at times. I would also include exercises such as a wood chopper, which is a rotational exercise. And if you notice, when you do a side volley or anything like that, you are rotating your torso. So that will have direct carryover to sports. I would also, on occasion, do offsetted loaded carries. For example, a suitcase farmer's walk. You guys know what a suitcase farmer's walk is? It's where you
beat me to it.
It's where you carry a heavy dumbbell in one hand and you walk. So you're having to stabilize your body with only weight on one side of your body. Things like that, which are not typically done in your regular training, are the only real core exercises I put a lot of emphasis on.
Yeah, so I think like
for doing the most like part carrying this huge brain around and just making sure my body is staying straight it's a good core exercise.
Yeah, so
lifting does make you smarter, by the way.
Yeah,
it improves cognitive function.
Yeah, so I think I'm in alignment with most with pretty much everything that was said here, that it's lower on the list than, most people put it like first on the list. There's a reason I don't include it for beginners. But sometimes I include it for beginners just because they expect it and they'll be like, this guy has no idea what he's doing if he's not having me train my core. So I'll include it just to get more buy-in. And I'll do things like, pile off press. I like the suitcase.
Which one is that one?
Press.
It's where you have a band attached to a rack and it's pulled against and you're pressing sideways. So you're not actually pressing with the resistance. The resistance is going to your side.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So I like suitcase carries a lot. I also do things like, waiters walks. So, holding them up and walking instead, obviously with a lot lighter load. Planks are good, fairly easy. So I can include that for beginners, but training your agility, your balance, your coordination, these things can be done, without sit-ups, without traditional core exercises. And they're just a lot more beneficial. So,
also, sure when are you crunching or sitting up in a soccer game?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe goalkeepers can say that, but if you're sitting up on a football field, you're on your butt anyways, and you need to get up. But I just wanted to add maybe a controversial topic for a lot of people when it comes to resistance training. In fact, my exercise science professor in college did not like the idea of this. What's your opinion of using weightlifting belts? Because this applies to the core.
So for me, I have, I think it probably comes down to, personal preference. I'm not sure if we're going to agree or disagree here. If someone wants to wear a weightlifting belt, go for it. If they, learning how to brace, and, learning that with a belt, it can help people learn how to brace sometimes. If you have to brace against something. So, when you take a big breath, and you're like,
the Valsalva maneuver.
Yeah. So you're contracting. It's easier with a
belt.
I
want to see a visual dedemonstration of the Valsalva maneuver from you.
I am not, I am not, for a long time I trained with a belt. I'm not training with a belt right now just because, I have a little bit less time to train, and I'm
belt feels like a chore.
Not really. I'm liking how I'm doing my training right now. I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know. I just don't feel the need to wear it right now. I know how to brace, so I'm good on that. Yeah.
It just never goes with my gym outfits, the belt, so I just can't put it on.
You just need to get nicer belts like I have. Like I have a hot pink powerlifting belt.
D has a nice belt. My belt's plain.
I have a nice
one. But you left your belt here, didn't you?
Yeah, I don't usually wear a belt. I don't know. I just prefer. I prefer not to for the most part.
I guess since I brought it up, I should make my points. So I actually agree with Christo that personal preference is the biggest deal, especially for a soccer player. Now, if you're in a powerlifting meet, you're going to want to lift a belt. However, I do want to make the case for why a good weightlifting belt, or I should say powerlifting belt, because actually like most belts are terrible. Like if you go to the regular gym or a regular sporting goods store and buy a belt, it's probably going to suck. Yeah. But the benefits of there's this common misconception, and my exercise science professor in college had this misconception. It was like, you don't wear a belt on a field. Why would you wear a belt while you're doing strength training? Well, I don't have a bar on my back when I'm on the field either.
It's not you're not trying to make things as specific as possible. You're just trying to get general adaptations.
It's really silly. But the common theory is that it will decrease your core activity and strength ability. And this is, according to the research, completely untrue. The belt does not decrease any core adaptations for the most part. But the big pros that I've found is that training with a belt, you can brace harder, and this almost always makes you lift heavier
More, yeah.
and you can do more weight. And more importantly, this is actually why I would recommend players that do have access to the belts do it, especially on exercises like a squat or a deadlift, is they have shown that there is less spine rounding on squats and deadlifts from people that wear belts to people that do not wear belts. And I don't want to alarm people. Spinal rounding is not the end of the world, and you're probably not going to get injured from it. However, it can affect recovery. And the point I made before, we want to get as much stimulus for adaptation with as little of fatigue as possible because we're trying to perform on the pitch. So limiting any spinal flexion from the squat by using a belt will be beneficial because you'll be able to get the same stimulus to your quads and glutes without having the fatigue to your lower back. And I actually think it's really beneficial, especially for people who have been lifting a while and have access to it. And it does help with bracing. Like most people brace better with a belt because it's easier to press out against it than it is to just clinch and get everything tight without a belt.
Yeah. I think, probably, optimally, belt is good. But at the same time, I don't know. I think it comes down to the player at the end of the day. And I think if, if you don't like wearing a belt or you don't have access to one, or you just don't want to wear one, you can live a full life without one. Yeah. And I want to just touch on one more kind of niche thing, and then we can go through some exercises and then we can wrap up. There's so much to talk about with resistance training. We'll probably have to do another episode at some point because I feel like I could keep talking about stuff for like another hour, but
I also have a hot take that we have to make before the episode ends.
Okay. So one thing I want to bring up really, really quick is variable resistance. So training with things like bands and chains.
Yes,
Now, again, this is like, again, kind of like the belt thing. Like a lot of players don't have access to stuff like this. And if you don't worry about it. But I have seen some evidence that, so the research that I'm aware of was done with, training the bench press. And they had some people train, with weights, but attach bands as well. And other people just did the weights and they trained at similar intensities. And at the end of a couple months, they checked for strength and they checked for power. Strength outputs were almost identical. No real differences between the two groups. Power outputs were higher for the group training with bands as well as weights. So if you can, adding in some band work. So obviously this is done, I would say, like on compound movements. If you can add stuff like bands and chains to your exercises, so that it changes the
resistance curve.
Yeah, the resistance curve. So for a bench, because this is what I'm talking about. It makes the bench harder as you go up. So that the hardest part of the bench would be the lockout. If you're using bands, because obviously that's when the bands are the most stretched. That could be something you could add in optimally. Like if I had a perfect gym and I was training high level athletes, I would include bands and chains at some times, probably not every session, but I would include them.
And I will second this. And also, like, I use chains a lot on squats and also on deadlifts for two reasons. And we'll first start with the most important one. It really looks cool. Like, you look so much cooler with a bunch of chains hanging from the bar than you do just plates. And that matters a lot.
Well, honestly, yeah. Like, I mean, if a player's like, oh, I'm, doing training with chains, like this is so badass. Yeah. Like, this is awesome. Yeah. Like then.
Exactly. And I mean, but from a actual, like, trying to be more objective, obviously being cool is objective, but from the more sport specific principles, What chains and accommodating resistance train is it trains you to press hard throughout the entire movement. We have seen in some lifters when they're doing a movement, once they get past the sticking point, they sometimes ease up and finish the lift. Well, if I add 80 pounds of chain resistance onto my squat, I can't just ease up after I've got past the sticking point, because let's say I have 400 pounds of plate weight and 80 pounds of chains. Well, after I've got past the sticking point, I've added 80 pounds to the squat. So it's now hard again. So I have to train all the way through the movement. And this has, for sport specific principles in soccer, a lot of carryover, because at the joint angles that we're going to be running and jumping at, that's when the chains or the bands would kick in and really have their most benefit. And that's the range of motion that we actually need to apply the most force and power in. So taking it easy there would be counterproductive at times. Now, do I think it will have a huge benefit? You'll see people who don't use bands and chains losing in a 40-yard dash or having a shorter vertical. In most cases, no. Individual differences will be greater than that. However, I do think under optimal settings, I would use at least some chains on squats and deadlift variations. I'm less of a fan of bands, especially on bench press, because the bar path on bench press isn't straight. I'd actually use chains on bench press instead of bands. But
I don't
bands
have chains.
You should. They're
I
much
know.
cooler. They're much
I'm
cooler.
building my gym, man. I'm in the process. I'll get there, and it's gonna be the best. But yeah. Again, like this is optimal stuff. The most important thing is that you're just training consistently. I don't know if maybe this is your hot take. Something I should have brought up earlier. We talked about how women should be resistance training, children should be resistance training, 100%. There is no evidence that even as young as like 5 years old, doing like some, you're not going to put a barbell on the back of a 5-year-old, but they can do like body weight squats and stuff. Like there's like, if you make this stuff fun, it's great. My niece has a little 5-pound barbell that she, does stuff with. She picks it up and she like overhead presses it and hops on the bench and does
stuffed animals.
Yeah.
Other stuffed animals pick it up.
Yeah. And like this, like
2 marshmallows.
Yeah. Well, we have the fake or not the fake weights, the training plates that are like 2.5 pounds, like big bumpers to put on them. And this, building a habit of resistance training in kids, super beneficial because it makes them more likely to resistance train when they're older, whether that's for athletics or just for life in general. Resistance training is good for both. And building a habit early on is so important for kids. And if you actually look at the American Pediatric, I forget what it's called, something of American Pediatrics, has recommendations for resistance training in kids. And the recommendations are that even kids as young as 5 should be doing some like body weight movements, like that you could qualify as resistance training. And then, at 9 to 11, they should be, doing things that are semi-structured. And then past that, they should be doing, other things, because the benefits are just undeniable if you look at the literature in an unbiased way. Kids 5 years old aren't going to be deadlifting, tens of pounds, but but like, they can pick up.
If I have
kids,
it'll be hundreds.
Yeah, true. They can like pick. They can pick stuff up. There's nothing.
Well, I mean, there was the viral video, the TikTok of the little baby picking
kettlebell,
up
right?
No, it's a medicine ball. I mean, it's like a.
I think I saw a kettlebell too. Yeah, I saw the medicine ball. Yeah.
But the thing about it is there's always been this theory that it could stunt your growth or damage your growth plates, and there's absolutely zero evidence to support this theory. This was just basically one of those theories that have just gone down through the years. This is why you shouldn't start strength training, at least until you're in high school. And it turns out that there's just no evidence to support that. But there is a lot of evidence, and this is actually from youth powerlifting and youth weightlifting competitions, that kids do it safely and don't get injured. Like there are kids that literally 5-year-old kids that are competing in powerlifting competitions, squat, bench press, and deadlift, and they come out fine and they love it and they have fun. And I'm going to tell you something, they're a lot stronger than all the kids their age because
yeah. Yeah. And as I've actually seen a little bit of evidence too, that like training as a kid, the performance benefits you'll get from that are, can be like almost unique in some ways. Like you can progress so quickly, as a kid for, whatever reason. Maybe it's just easier to learn, these movements and stuff if you start at a young age. But yeah, like, resistance training in kids, is super important. There's no evidence that it hurts you. And one more thing, I could go on forever. Form. How much does form matter when you're doing exercises? Not much. Anyone telling you that, like, if you're not doing this exercise perfectly, you're going to injure yourself or something. There's not really any evidence of that. Like, Noblet mentioned like bar path on a bench. So like, obviously you don't want to press up in a straight line, but like, pushing the bar a little bit back towards your face as you push off is optimal for strength. But if you did end up pushing in a straight line, it's not like it's gonna like injure you or something.
And more importantly, the lifting with a rounded back is probably not going to injure. In fact, your back is always slightly rounded. And that's probably the one we're really going to worry about, is people, especially on exercises like the deadlift. It's mostly deadlift that gets blamed for this. Is they'll see people with any rounding whatsoever as, oh my gosh, you're going to go to Snap City for this. And it's like, that's just not true. Now, do I think form matters? Yes, but not for the reasons that people think. I think form matters primarily to make sure that you're actually getting the adaptations for the goal you want.
Yep.
And for maximizing strength and leverages. And if you have a super rounded back in your deadlift, you're probably not going to deadlift as much as if you didn't have a rounded back. Now, there are exceptions to this. Some world record deadlifters have a very rounded back, but we can get into that on a different day. And also from a recovery perspective, if you're rounding your back on a lot of deadlifts, that means your spinal erectors are going to be doing a lot of the work. And this actually also goes to the specific thing you want to train, because if I'm deadlifting, I want my hamstrings and glutes doing more of the work than my spinal erectors. But we don't want our lower backs being sore as can be all the time, especially as a soccer player, because a sore back can be really hard to play on. And if your back is super rounded every single time you do deadlifts, you're more likely to have a sore back. Where if you can keep it at least closer to being in a neutral position, you might limit some of that fatigue, but you're also not going to hurt yourself.
Yeah, like resistance training, like people are afraid that, oh, if I don't train perfectly, I'm going to injure myself. That's not going to happen. Obviously, optimally, you'll be squatting to depth or, some sort of depth.
We should stop.
Right?
We should talk about depth actually, because that's actually a controversial topic and for sports.
Yeah. I think like, obviously there's some evidence that, doing like, quarter squats will help your vertical jump more than going deep. I still like, when I'm training beginners, I'll do, deep squats, like what do they, if they can't go to parallel comfortably or something, obviously that's something to work on. But I think, I'll start with that stuff, and I can add in stuff like quarter squats, kind of later on. I usually don't start with that though.
No, I agree. And I actually brought up the point. Are you familiar with he's more basketball oriented, but Dr. Ross Greenfield on TikTok?
Yeah, I think so. I think I agree with most of his stuff. I think we had a disagreement on something though.
It was probably squat depth, because that's my one big disagreement with him, because I agree with him on everything. And he goes the opposite direction. He thinks that partial range of motion should be the main movement for athletes and full range of motion is supplementary. And I do it from the opposite approach. And I think you and I are the same way. And my point for this is I do think a full range of motion is squat. Now, I will say a full range of motion squat for a soccer player is different than a Olympic weightlifter or a powerlifter necessarily. And only on a powerlifting meet is there actual rule on squat depth, which is top of the thigh at the hip joint must pass below the knee. For soccer players, I mostly want them squatting as low as they can comfortably, while before their butt tucks under at the bottom, what's called a butt wink. I want them to stop before that happens, or at least to a significant degree. A little bit of butt wink is not a problem, but just before that happens, because that might cause lower back fatigue, and then come up. For most people, this is going to be below parallel. Some people, this will be slightly above parallel. And this also depends on how far forward your knees travel. But the vast majority of people, I would start out doing the full range of motion they're capable of. If they can't get anywhere near parallel, we're going to probably focus on mobility before we even get to adding weight on the bar. But yeah, I would do it as supplementary and unfortunately, I don't know if there's much research on carryover for this for sprinting and vertical jump, but there is research on this for your 1 rep max squats. They have found that full range of motion squats will increase your quarter squat, but not as much as quarter squats will increase your quarter squat. But they have found that quarter squats will not increase your full range of motion squat very much. And the fact of the matter is for general physical preparedness, or GPP, as Dimitri, the exercise scientist, calls it,
Right.
You need to be stronger in those greater range of motions too. You can't just be strong in the sport-specific range of motion at all times. While it might be rare for me to be in a deep squatted position or an equivalent joint angle of a deep squatted position in a soccer match, I would never say it never happens. And I can at least think of 1 or 2 examples of it happening, and that would be goalkeepers getting off the ground after diving. My first step as a goalkeeper standing up and on the ground diving, my knee angle is almost completely closed. So I am pressing almost from the equivalent of a full squat position.
Yeah, I think a huge thing to say is that, and I've said this before, but you're in the gym for general adaptations, not specific adaptations. You're trying to get generally strong, generally powerful, and then you put those things on the field. You're not trying to get strong in very, very specific situations and then go on the field and do that. You get generally strong, generally powerful in the gym, and then you can do plyometric exercises and play to kind of for the sport specific stuff. I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 at some point to get
my hot take.
Yeah, we'll end with your hot take. And we'll wrap it up there, and we'll do a part 2 where we talk about more resistance training stuff, because it is a huge topic.
Okay, so do you guys know who the player Akinfenwa is?
Oh, spin wheel, yeah.
Akinfenwa, like SK, you guys all know him. So Akinfenwa is sometimes called the strongest footballer in the world, and
this guy, right? Okay, the huge
guy from Wimbledon.
Yeah, and he's always had the highest strength rating in all the FIFA video games. And so my hot take is, I don't think he's the strongest footballer in the world.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I don't think he ever has been the strongest footballer in the world. And I'll take it this far. I think I would beat him in a 3-lift powerlifting meet, squat, bench press, and deadlift. I think I could actually beat him. And I'm definitely not the strongest footballer in the world either. And I think that this reputation,
Dimitri would beat both of you though. So
I think this, well, maybe
easily.
he's
you're just playing for second.
But I think the reputation is largely built on his FIFA rating and his appearance. But I've actually watched some of his workout videos, and with the exception of bench press, which he doesn't even touch his chest on his bench press. So in my opinion, it doesn't even count. But his lifts are not actually impressive. And I've never actually seen him do a squat or a deadlift. I've only seen him doing mainly bodybuilder style upper body exercises and very, very little lower body exercises. So I actually think that there are probably several players in the top leagues in Europe in particular who, in the lifts that I think matter, such as the squat, bench, overhead press, or deadlift, or also the Olympic lifts too, for that matter, I think there's a lot of guys who could beat him, who would demonstrate greater strength than he can. And that includes me. So Akinfenwa, if you watch our podcast, meet me on the platform. I want to have a powerlifting meet for you, and we'll settle it.
I want to see
Dimitri,
this.
It'll be for second place to Dimitri as the strongest footballer in the world.
Yeah,
Dimitri doesn't.
I won't embarrass you by like
you'll be
the
the head judge. You'll be the head judge.
Actually, I saw Zlatan posted a picture on Facebook, and it was like when they had the cheetah racing dogs to see like how much faster the cheetah was than the racing dogs, and there's this photo of the cheetah just sitting like it didn't run. And all the dogs are already running. I think this was Zlatan. I could be wrong. And it was, and they like asked someone, "Oh, what happened?" It's like, I guess it was insulting to the cheetah to have to prove that he was better than all these racing dogs. Don't. Yeah, it was a very Zlatan esque post, but I thought it was pretty funny. So that's Dimitri.
To prove.
Yeah, that they're stronger than sheep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's Dimitri. Dimitri is the lion. Akinfenwa and Noblet are the sheep, but at least Noblet is the stronger of the two sheep. So I think what we'll do is maybe we'll go more on specific things next week. So we'll talk about specific exercises, specific plans, how we do that all out, because I think that is something that players want. Here we talked a little bit more generally, but at least if you've listened to this podcast, you'll know kind of the principles and how to apply them when we talk about the specifics next week. I feel like I could go on forever talking about this topic, but I do think we should wrap it up there because we've been going for a while. And my water bottle is empty as well.
To go to.
Yeah. So water bottle's empty. Any final thoughts, or are we good to wrap it up?
I think we're good.
Bench press and single leg dumbbell Romanian deadlift to do. So
all right, sweet.
I'll catch you on the other side.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week. Quickly going to shout out. I upload the podcast to my Patreon first, so you get it 2 days early if you sub to me on Patreon. And then obviously when I post it, I'll tag Dimitri's Instagram, SK's TikTok, my TikTok, and Noblet's TikTok. You should be following all of us. If you're not, what are you doing? Come on, wake up. Best podcasts on the internet, and we're only 2 episodes in, so start watching before it's cool. That's about it. Peace.
Later.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
Boa tarde.